Alright, I am back with another Destiny 2 video, and this is sort of a follow-up to yesterday's video, given that there was a ton of information dumped out, plus a hotfix that was live in the game already, and the general consensus is they are making Destiny easier. After a month where they were, bringing challenge back to Destiny. The way they did that did not go over super well, outside of a few very vocal supporters, Skill Up. Generally speaking, I think the majority opinion was that a lot of the changes they made did not feel good. It's a weird difficulty thing because a lot of the changes they made affected like lower level activities like patrol and lost sectors, whereas super high end content like raids, the master raid, in some ways felt easier. Like mechanically, yes, they're more difficult, but like the actual enemies, it was very bizarre to go from just like even Neomuna patrol to the raid and just enemies falling over, or like the legendary campaign to the raid. Fundamentally, I don't think that's really shifted yet because it's not like there are any increases in difficulty on the raid side. Zooming out, while they made things easier, I think they have done it in the right way, in a way that should kind of satisfy both sides. The real problem here is that a lot of the changes they made were to make enemies feel less bullet spongy. You can debate this, but I am of the opinion generally that just giving enemies a lot more health and having it take a lot more ammo to kill them is both not fun and not really the right type of challenge in a game. I think the worst thing you could say about any shooter, or like the kiss of death, is often bullet spongy enemies. I remember the Division forever we talk about bullet spongy enemies on its higher difficulties, and then in that game it was even more ridiculous because you have this like dude wearing a hoodie and he's got like 17 armor bars and it takes like 50 clips to get through him. Like, I don't think Destiny's ever quite reached that point, but certainly things like, orange bars on Neomuna were like some of the chonkiest, like normal enemies I think we've ever seen in the game. So the changes are mostly focused on reducing enemy health, and then future changes are focused on letting players do more damage. And so how that's played out, the health reductions are not really like that crazy. It is a 10% health reduction in Legend and Master content. And in many ways, you may not even feel that. On the Power Delta activities, especially, you're not really going to feel that a ton. And again, this is not bosses or yellow bars or champions. This is just red bar and orange bar enemies. So it's helpful in that it's a little easier to mob clear down or take out orange bars, and then it will be even more accessible once they get all these, once we have this slate of weapon buffs. But I will say, one thing I feel like you crybabies, they just made Destiny easier now, that crowd needs to consider is that they didn't make enemies do any less damage. So I would say on the whole, they kept all this delta stuff in place. So Legend is still minus 15, Master still minus 20. Like, the enemies are still hitting just as hard as they have. And outside of, bugged out damage things like one-shotting Threshers, that still makes for some pretty challenging encounters. So like, for instance, the other thing they did is they reduced health scaling on Legend Avalon because enemies, with a fire team, they just got ridiculously tanky. So that has changed. And yet what they did not change is the damage. So if you're sitting in the little moat depositing hole, you still have to find a way to strategize to get the wyverns not to one-shot you sitting in that hole, or anywhere else really, because they are doing just a significant amount of damage there. And so while I still want them to look into potential sources of damage that may be a little bugged based on frame rate, I think wyverns might be, honestly, they hit so hard, and then like taken fire, things that are like people have theorized might be tied to frame rate. I want them to look at that, but I think what Bungie is doing here is they're kind of leaning into what people have said that they want in terms of difficulty, where, enemies don't have a ton of health, but players don't either. And so it's sort of like glass cannon versus glass cannon. So you have to employ movement, cover, like strategy, like all of this stuff to, to beat enemies rather than just like, okay, I got to peek out and like empty half this clip into this red bar, reload, have to empty the other half of the clip into the red bar, and like just slowly progress that way. Um, it seems to me like, they're not making any enemy damage reduction changes, so I still think that things are generally going to be on the whole more challenging than they were previously. We still have things like the GM Mars Battleground to come with its infinitely respawning enemies and like infinite wizards spawning, and like, so well, those enemies, some of them at least, not all of them, will have 10% less health. That's still going to be like a crazy, PvE experience. Again, it does seem weird that some things were left out of the equation, but like raids and master raids and things like that. However, that's something that may be a longer conversation, and I would say, an increase in difficulty for the master raid should also really probably accompany an increase in rewards. I know a lot of people have been saying you should be able to get artifice armor from master raids, which I agree with. I don't know why that would be a bad thing. I guess artifice armor is like a way to get people to do dungeons instead of raids because it's the only source of it, really. Did they put artifice armor in trials? I don't even remember, but it should be in more than like one place, and so that seems like a good idea to me. In terms of the weapon buffs that are coming, this is kind of the example of, everyone's always like, don't nerf the powerful things, buff the weak things. This is a prime example of that. So right now, SMGs are the most viable, like, mob clearing type of weapon in the game. Bows are the most viable, long range, plink your enemies down type of weapon. And they're not nerfing those, they are buffing up the other weapon types to be on that standard, or at least they're trying to. So that means 25% for auto rifles, which badly need it. This is against red and orange bars, and stacks with exotic primary 40% red bar damage buff. They're doing 20% for pulse rifles, hand cannons, and sidearms, and then 10% for scout rifles. And then they've said in the future they're going to be doing a 10% sniper buff, plus they're doing some dramatic recoil reduction changes for rapid fires. These are pretty significant buffs. It has certainly gotten people thinking about, is suddenly Sweet Business a viable option to run if it's doing just ridiculous damage based on these buffs as an auto rifle and as a exotic. Quicksilver Storm just got its 40% damage to red bars restored, and it already feels really great, and then it's going to get another 25% buff on top of that. Plus the way weapon surges work now. And then, for pulse rifles, I'm hearing people talk about like Outbreak and things like that they haven't visited in a while. Sidearms are already pretty strong. It's just the engagement range is not amazing. But now if they're even stronger, it might be worth the risk. The one thing I have a question about is hand cannons. Based on how bad hand cannons, especially legendary hand cannons, feel in PvE, I do wonder if a 20% buff is even enough. I'm not sure it is. I feel like it almost might need to be more than that, at least for legendaries. I think certain weapons like Sunshot, I bet, is going to feel pretty good after this as a exotic hand cannon that has great mob clearing capabilities and now has these double buffs. So, but I don't know. 20% doesn't quite sound like enough for legendaries, but maybe it's too much, or anything higher would be too much for exotics. Long and short is it's going to be a very weird year because we have this larger difficulty rework coming later in the year, and I have read some of the leaks for that, and I guess I won't get into it. It's not story leaks, and things that aren't story leaks I generally am okay covering, but I don't know. You can let me know what you think about that. But it is a substantial rework of the power system, and so I think we're kind of caught in this weird middle ground time where Bungie's just trying to do stuff in the interim, and then it's all going to change again anyway once they do this larger rework. Hopefully it won't be too chaotic, but in the interim, we're about to see, they buffed enemies to be as hard as they've ever been, then they nerfed them, then they're buffing our weapons, so we might see, even if enemies are still hitting pretty hard, we still might see a swing in difficulty pretty far back in the other direction based on how powerful we are after these changes. And then you'll have people complaining about that. So I think there's still work to be done. Raids need some help, both in terms of how enemies feel and rewards. I still don't even know if Neo Mundo Patrol is necessarily the place to have the beefiest red bars in the game. That still seems a little odd to me. But certainly what I'm the most curious about is to feel all these weapon changes that I think should be coming next week, if not the week after. But yeah, so my position is that no, I don't think they just made Destiny 2 easy, or they're about to with the next patch. I think things were in a very bad state when Lightfall launched, and in most of these Legend of Master activities, certain things felt fine, like Legendary Campaign I thought was fine, but it was a problem. It was very bad, and it needed to be changed, and it wasn't just me saying that. Like, the big decision makers at Bungie also have to agree with that, and they did, and here we are. That said, I don't think that we are now in a place that is easier than the changes that were made before Lightfall. With the deltas they have in place, you are still getting enemies that hit way harder in many instances than they ever have before on certain types of content. And then all of this will be potentially thrown out the window when they change the difficulty system again over the course of the next year. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.